Chapter 16. 6 months. The weather was still warm for late fall, though the leaves were beginning to drift down into the moat in muddy splotches of red, green, and gold. The castle gardeners, recruited from Kakariko village if she had to guess, they moved much too quickly from Zelda's approach to know for sure, kept baskets brimming with mums and dahlias throughout the balconies and entrances. Half of the red, blue, and gold Hyrule royal crest banners and flags flanking doorways, adorning the halls, and suspended from the rafters had been switched out for the black and gold Gerudo banner by the servant, a menagerie of Hylians, Ritos and Gorons she only rarely glimpsed. They seemed aware of her patterns and how best to avoid her, though whether this was out of fear, disgust, or command, she could only guess. She absent-mindedly cupped one of the pom-pom dahlias in her hand, with petals so thin and feathery they scarcely registered against her skin. As she twirled the stem, she admired the sunny flower's secret blush along the underside, ringing its leafy sepal. A fading impulse floated through her mind, the thought to sketch the blossom in her notebook, cataloging the date and where she'd found it. She had no idea where her books and pencils were now that her tower office has long been dismantled, and she wasn't sure if she was allowed in that wing of the castle, even if it remained. Rules were unclear here until they were broken. She pivoted her hips slightly, from right to left, her body shifting around the blossom's center, a celestial body existing only in relation to its star. What a lovely pose this must be, she thought, tilting her head to catch the light. Her silk kimono sleeve fluttered from her arm, the simple black fabric that had become her signature setting off the jewels encircling her throat. Everything now, in the space of these 186 days, was a series of poses, images and gestures and narratives, cultivating the reality that the king desired. That was why she spent so many afternoons here on the observation deck, framed by the flower arrangements, with little to see out in the courtyard and town square, but well aware that she could be seen from here. The king wanted her to be glimpsed, at least here, on this preen stage where she couldn't see or overhear something she wasn't supposed to. The people must infer how marvelous their queen is being treated, how elegant and sophisticated she's become, how wonderful Hyrule Castle is now that she's returned. These were his wishes, and he'd made sure she understood them. She clenched her palm around the honeycomb of petals, feeling its intricate network of pockets implode in her fist as it collapsed in on itself. There was truth in his story, wasn't there? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps scaling the observation steps behind her.
"Lena?"
she called, arranging the crumpled flower on the promenade's railing.
"No, Your Highness. It's Ellie." "Oh, Ellie."
She tried to hide the disappointment in her voice, knowing she hadn't done it well. In these weeks she'd come to prefer the stoic Verena guard to the moon-faced Hylian, whom she perpetually felt the need to comfort in, well, pretty much every scenario. Lena said nothing outside of necessity, and Zelda enjoyed the quiet within the private moments she was tasked to oversee. She'd continued to correct the swoop of kohl and smeary flush of rouge rising above the queen's lid and cheek, a severe look that Ellie couldn't, or wouldn't, perfect, but that made Ganondorf's chest swell with approval upon seeing her, another morsel of proof that the world was submitting to his design. With so little else to occupy her, an outcast in her own home, that validation shifted to the center of her universe.
"Come in,"
she went on, noting the halt in Ellie's approach.
"You're not interrupting anything."
The girl stepped forward carrying a tray of afternoon tea. Zelda had received snacks and treats in all the days before this one, which were beginning to blend together in their placid sameness. The constant she'd learned in an unnaturally long life of chaos and turbulence was that anything, no matter how jarring or unthinkable or impossible it may seem at first, only remained so briefly. The few disorienting mornings she woke up in the ancient palace of Rose Hyrule, or coalesced in Calamity's prison, or waking in the morning with the weight of her enemy's arms sprawled across her shoulders. Her dreams would remain in the befores, sending her mind racing to catch up with the afters, the wave of disappointment when the new reality weighed back down and cracked through the suspended moment of unawareness. For a bit, everything became ordinary. Soon enough, she had yet to encounter a horror she couldn't swallow. This afternoon, however, the ordinary tray had taken on a distinctly regal air with a new silver teapot and matching tray arranged with small cookies and miniature nutcakes, spaced artfully apart. The teapot was lightly etched with her favorite flower, while the delicate accompanying tray featured the same blossoms in sculpted handles. She hadn't seen silverware like this in 100 years.
Where did this come from?
She asked, tracing the outline of silent princess petals etched into the teapot.
It only arrived today. A merchant in town claimed it was his finest set. There's been a bunch of silver coming out of Goron City lately,
Ellie said.
It's starting to make its way into the shops. Everyone is going mad for it, trying to put together the finest sets. Kind of a nice distraction, you know. It's exquisite.
Zelda breathed, lifting it up above her head to examine the craftsmanship. No seams. How had such skills survived the apocalypse?
It's difficult for the silversmith to get it correct in one try, especially with something this detailed. This must have taken someone days. My mother used to have some Goron silver.
She remembered unexpectedly.
Her hairbrush, upstairs. And there was a vase. She'd take me out to the fields and we'd pick flowers together. She showed me how to arrange them.
Ellie squinted, that look of discomfort that Zelda had grown familiar with over the years. There was a great deal that most people she encountered weren't equipped or willing to face. Her losses and unnatural expanse of life were chief among them.
It's all right.
Zelda made a point to reassure her, once again.
I lost her a long time ago. It's nice to have something beautiful like this to remember, sometimes. Oh yes,
Ellie said, her voice suddenly strained.
So many beautiful things are appearing now that people are sent into the depths.
The silver pot met the tray with a clatter. She recoiled at the mention of her most dreaded place, shattering her dreamy awe.
What are you talking about? How is anything happening in the depths? We sealed off practically every chasm years ago. It was our first restoration project, before we even touched the castle.
Ellie's wide eyes darted from the railing to the doorways and back again, confirming that the nearest guard was still a generous distance down the stairs. Even still she leaned close, dropping her voice to barely discernible whisper.
He's reopened the mines. The mines? The abandoned ones?
She had heard of these behemoths of industry in vague, passing mentions from Ling, which were confusing. Roru and Sonia hadn't mentioned the depths to her at all during her time, let alone any kind of major operations within them. But from Link's account, they were in total disrepair, relics of the Zonai Empire vanished from memory.
Not anymore. The one beneath the Great Plateau has been running all night and day.
She cupped her hands around her lips, tunneling the secret into Zelda's ear.
They weren't getting enough people to go down there, so they started rounding them up instead. That doesn't make sense.
She reasoned aloud.
Ganondorf hasn't deployed any open hostilities against the general population. That's not what my friends say,
she said, her tone still hushed.
Or the people I talk to at the bar at night, when the Yigas empty out. The people out there, in the towns and outskirts? First they were trapped, and now they're being taken.
Zelda swallowed hard.
Who is being sent down there? Boys and men from the towns, at least the ones who aren't already farming or running stores or stables, or haven't been picked up by Hudson Construction. Anyone who doesn't seem indispensable from what I've heard.
He stood back a bit, letting out a little sigh of relief as her secret safely passed.
My friend Amy's boyfriend has already gotten gloom sickness twice over it. And that's just the operations happening down below. They're also ramping up all the digs in Death Mountain in the desert. They have these bombs that can take off a whole hillside in a matter of seconds. And even at that pace, they can hardly keep up.
Zelda stared into the mirrored silver, her coal-smudged face warping in the reflection.
He didn't tell you, did he?
Ellie pressed, clearly thrilled with herself.
How can you possibly know what's actually happening out there when you only see squints of life from up here? It's not as if he wants you to learn or participate in anything he has planned. He must not even let you into the library anymore. Not if he's keeping secrets from his beloved queen. I'm not supposed to go in there, but the other servants see it. He isn't happy.
There was a growing distraction she sensed in the king, not only in his longer absences in the library-turned-war room. It was in the muted dinners, where he stared out the windows into the pitch black of night. His abrupt shortness with the staff and soldiers, a contrast from his former menacing charm. The nights she found herself alone in bed while he lingered on the chamber balcony, until she finally drifted off to sleep. His absence made her restless, a sort of purgatory between species of dread. His affection was a distraction. On these nights she felt as ornamental and useless as the banners hanging limp around the halls.
They've been hounding the whole realm to help them find Link, but there's only been a few sightings at stables and on the outskirts, and in the last 2 months, they've totally dried up. He's got to know that Link is coming back to save you. He's much too stealthy and smart to be caught by his goon squad, and knows the corners of Hyrule better than anyone. And it's driving the king insane and...
She clutched her hands to her chest, in typical subtle fashion, tears welling in her eyes. The idea, spoken aloud, stunned her silent as she gazed at the anonymous mass of the realm stretching before her. She had not spoken Link's name aloud in all these weeks, knowing without being warned that such an act would be an instant provocation. In his disappearance from her lips, she'd been aware of his presence weakening in her thoughts, no longer the man she was accustomed to feeling beside her, and wisps of doubt began darkening her thoughts. Months and not so much as a sign of life? She'd imagined them being apart for a stretch, knew she had demanded it, in fact, but Ganondorf settled in deeper while Link remained invisible. Even without the aid of the sages or secret stones, there must be a solution. The Demon King was not a god. Link had the Master Sword, after all, and if she were freed from this dulling solid gloom, surely they'd stand a chance.
Can you tell me something, Your Highness?
Ellie asked, wrestling Zelda from her daze with a remarkably strong grip around her wrist. Her plump, pink lips quivered, aware she may live to regret the next word, but unwilling to squander this tender chance.
Why, in all the time between now and then, didn't you come back and marry Link? Didn't you love him?
From across the moat, a siege of herons spread their wings, calling out a last goodbye to the valley as they headed south toward Faron. Zelda watched them climb up toward the clouds and islands until they vanished into a realm that used to be her own, but that she could not remember. Nothing but another dream.
Didn't I love him?
The syllables fell from her lips like the crumpled petals released from her palm.
Didn't I love him?
Her delicate fingers hovered over the cookies and cakes on the tray, dancing above them as if she were about to choose. She ticked off each word as she spoke. Keys struck on an invisible piano. Ellie's question a botched chord. She wrapped her fingers around the steaming teapot's handle, the delicate engraving impressing its image into her skin. She felt the metal singe against her sensitive flesh, just about to blister before she hurled the vessel at the castle wall, sending the scalding tea water falling down the stone like a steaming splash fruit. The dented pot clattered onto the patio, the lid's finial rolling off the balcony. Ellie's hands flew to her mouth in a gasp, as if she'd witnessed a true tragedy playing Maiden Hash 3 in some third-rate theater production.
I had 7 years out of 30 to spend as I wished. Out of my entire life, which has been cursed to stretch out to thousands of years, I had 7 of them to spend where I wanted, as I wished, with the person I loved. He knew I loved him. The entire goddamn realm knew that we'd chosen each other. But it wasn't good enough for you all, was it?
She stood over the cowering servant girl, not much larger in stature but in her heaving, fuming rage, all of her power above this subject fumed to life. The jeweled collar seemed to cinch tighter around her neck, flushing her face with wrath. Puffs of short breath staccatoed from her flared nostrils, and her nails dug into her palm from her balled fists. Recalling how tightly Link had held on to her that last night, the thought like kerosene on her ignited nerve.
Why didn't I come back here with him? Why I didn't marry him under the eyes of the goddess, even as I lived each and every one of those days as his wife? Is that what you need to know so badly, Ellie?
The girl stared back, her hands still clasped over her mouth, a slow blink her only response.
Because that love between us was the only thing that was ours. Even if everyone in Hyrule knew that we were together, they couldn't see the millions of imperceptible ways we cared for each other. That all belonged to the two of us, and I cherished it so madly that no, Ellie, I never wanted to come back here. I didn't want to hear the Lucky Clover wonder out loud if it was appropriate or historically precedented for a knight of the royal guard to wed a Hylian princess. I didn't want to trap him in this suffocating prison where he would remain, without complaint, because he'd know it was demanded of him. I wanted our life away from your eyes so badly that I let myself believe that we'd taken care of all the threats this world could heave at us. I let that love make me foolish and soft, because that's how safe I felt within it.
So you and the servants gossip about how the king isn't happy, that he's losing patience trying to find the hero? Their queen isn't happy about it, either. You can tell them that.
Your Highness,
Ellie cried as Zelda stormed from the patio.
The tea. Clean it,
she ordered, her heels clicking down the observatory stairs toward the library. The two Yiga guards went rigid at the sight of the queen flying down the hallway, her light sleeves and robe floating behind her like a trail of smoke. Caught in the middle of a mid-shift snack, their mouths stuffed with banana bread, they did their best impression of competent guard staff.
Open the doors,
she said coolly.
I don't think. Your Highness, we're supposed to let you in,
choked out the right side guard, trying to pass off his muffles as his mask's side effect.
Oh, I'm sorry. I must be under some sort of misunderstanding,
she said, folding her arms tightly across her chest.
You see, I thought this was my castle and my library containing my collection of assembled articles and artifacts, and that's my husband the king inside, who has never made any mention that I am not allowed to see him during the day. Am I correct in believing that I reside here, or am I actually a prisoner? The
Yigas pivoted to one another, hoping the opposite wasn't out his depth.
If your representation of the king's wishes is to convey to me that he does not desire my presence when he is otherwise unoccupied, I will find that directive to be quite upsetting.
Her narrowed gaze leaned against each of them in turn, a fierceness defying the clenching in her stomach. She hadn't opposed anyone in the castle, save for the one piece of Yiga trash menacing her in the lockup months ago. In her mind, they were all that same vile one, a singular anonymous mass that was an easy conduit for her festering frustration and hate.
When the king endeavors to learn the source of my agitation, I'll have no choice but to tell him that it was the edict that his own guards relayed to me when I made the audacious request to visit my beloved within our own home. We're sorry, Your Highness,
the quicker one on the left said with a bow.
We just, haven't seen you down here yet. I'm sure His Supreme Highness would, love, to see you?
They remained still another beat, until her throat clearing sent the doors flying open. She marched in almost dazed, her legs propelling forward as hesitation clouded her focus. Her heart's disposition was to keep the peace, but the tension was nudging her to madness, teasing out this unfamiliar urge to shake the problem loose. From the far end of the room she could see Ganondorf glowering behind his peg-marked kingdom, flanked by a pair of idle Varinas, as ornamental as suits of armor in a hallway. A stable hand stood in his audience, wringing his soft felt hat in his hands, as he continued an explanation of,
There hasn't been anyone, not in days. The roads are closed, and all we see are your soldiers.
All of them jolted to attention as she marched inside, the dozen Varina at his side, and lining the room, drawing in a collective breath as they pivoted their focus to the king. One raised crimson eyebrow told she'd succeeded in surprising him, and he straightened his stance as a hollow smile emerged.
Zelda, what brings you away from tea?
The familiarity with her routine startled her for an instant. He was such a non-presence during the daylight hours. It seemed as if she didn't exist until sundown. But then, he could see everything in her existence now, shift or disappeared as he saw fit.
There are urgent matters I need to discuss with you.
He held her on the tip of a blade's edge for a heavy breath, tipping between his options, perhaps giving her the latitude to lose her nerve.
Get out,
he muttered to his subject, who flew to the exit as fast as his body was capable. He leaned his tailbone against the edge of the table, facing her and crossing his arms just below his chest piece. When had he gotten the secret stone? Her stone? Set in the middle. Had she not noticed until now, or had she honestly seen so little of him in the past weeks?
What's troubling you, my pet?
His endearing tone contrasted against the hardness in his gold-glint stare, marking well her intrusion.
What is this about the mines opening back up? Opening back up?
He scoffed.
When have Gerudo-dug desert mines been closed? Since before Hyrule fancied itself a kingdom? And wouldn't the Gorons shrivel up and starve if they weren't devouring their mountain from the inside out?
She shook her head, batting away the deflection.
I'm not talking about those operations. I'm talking about the caustic mines that were abandoned in the depths. I've been told that not only are they functioning again, but you've been sending your subjects down to work by force.
His bushy eyebrows narrowed, his eyes to slit. A fortress barricading.
Told by whom?
She twisted the silk fabric of her sleeve between her thumb and forefinger, trying to steady her nerves.
It doesn't matter. I should have been told by you. So you've come to accuse me of... What exactly, Your Highness? Some crime against your people, or not regaling you with debriefings on policy. It's hard to know what I should be most concerned with, when you've kept everything from me,
she said, his irritation heady in the air, a fume making the words light off her tongue.
It doesn't seem that I'm so much as allowed in here with how heavily it's guarded. Tracy and Penn won't speak to me unless you've dictated a story or picture you want them to cover, let alone let me see any copies of the paper once it's out. My only indication that the world I knew exists out there in some form is because I can't smell smoke. In half a year I've shuffled through the same wing of the castle like an exotic bird you're training for show. Why don't you just frame me and tack me up in the archive with all the other excellent treasure you've won in your coup?
The king remained leaning against the table, ensuring that she'd finished before easing forward. He crossed the half-step between them. He reached for the necklace around her neck, idly smoothing his thumb over the gloomstone, and in its responsive red glow made the shelves around her start to spin. His grasp opened quickly to catch her, a gesture that appeared concerned, chivalrous from the outside. But the mass of that grip around her neck, a squeeze without the smallest exertion of his force, reminded Zelda of how very little it would take him to snap her bones. As he could, right this moment, in his theater of enraptured warriors. Instead, he spoke.
These walls are getting to you, aren't they, darling? I was waiting for the situation to be more ideal before I unveiled Hyrule to you, but things have not progressed as quickly as I'd hoped. That wasn't quite fair to you, now was it?
He traced her jaw, as if casting a curse.
We should remedy that, shouldn't we? Gisela,
he barked, calling the attention of a Verena in their periphery.
Alert the stable, the king and queen require their horses.
End of chapter.